All right. So, as you may be aware, on July 1st, 2026, law school is changing forever. The biggest safety net students have relied on for the last 20 years, specifically, the Grad Plus Loans program is going to be gone. And in its place, we're going to have a hard ceiling on exactly how much you can borrow. Specifically, you will not be able to borrow more than $50,000 a year in federal loans for law school. Period. Doesn't matter if your school's tuition is $55,000 a year. Doesn't matter if it costs $85,000 or $95,000 a year. The cap is the cap. And the kicker is that for most law schools, 50,000 is not even close to the full cost per year. Because we got to consider tuition, rent, books, and even groceries. That means the entire way that you choose schools has also got to change. For years, people have been obsessing over prestige and bar passage rates, and they told themselves, I'll figure out the money part later. I've heard this thousands of times over the past 20 years, helping students with their LSAT prep and their law school applications. And for a while, it was okay. It kind of worked because Grad Plus loans were there to cover whatever you personally could not cover. But starting next year, I'll figure it out later is how you end up getting into a dream law school but not being able to afford to go. And this is not just another boring policy change, it's the biggest financial shakeup in legal education in decades. But if you understand how it works now, you can still win under the new rules. But first, let's get crystal clear on what exactly is happening here. Because this is not just some fine print tweak buried on some government website. This is a hard rule that changes the math for almost every single law school applicant. For decades, the federal government basically said, if you get into a grad program, we're going to give you the money that you need. That was the Grad Plus system. Didn't matter if your school cost $40,000 or $140,000. If you were eligible, you could borrow the full amount plus living expenses directly from the government. But that world is gone. Now you get a cap of $50,000 per year in unsubsidized federal loans. That is the maximum no matter what. You also have a $200,000 lifetime cap for all your graduate education combined. And this is where people tend to get tripped up. That cost of attendance number you see on a school's website is not just tuition. It's tuition plus rent, books, health insurance, transportation, and food. And if you're living in a higher cost city like New York, LA, San Francisco, your living expenses alone can easily eat up $25,000, $30,000 of that budget, which means your tuition money is going to run out fast. So if your total cost of attendance is over $50,000 a year, and spoiler, it is for the vast majority of law schools, you now have a gap. And you personally are going to be the one responsible for filling that gap. You could do it through scholarships, private loans, personal savings, or a combination of all three. But you can't just put it on the federal loan anymore. And that's why the stakes here are so high. It's not just about whether you can get in, it's about whether you can actually afford to stay in without wrecking your financial future. Now, to really understand why this change is so massive, you've got to know what came before it. Grad Plus loans were introduced back in 2006, nearly 20 years ago. And at the time, they were basically a blank check from the federal government for grad students. The thinking was simple. If you get into a graduate or professional program, law school, med school, business school, whatever, you should be able to finance it entirely with federal loans without any caps tied to tuition. And this was huge for law students. Before 2006, you had significantly stricter federal borrowing limits, which meant that you had to patch together the funding. Maybe some federal loans, maybe a private loan from a bank, maybe borrowing from family, and Grad Plus removed that stress. It became the backstop. And if your scholarship covered part of your tuition, that's great. But if not, Grad Plus filled in the rest. If you needed $20,000 for rent and food, Grad Plus covered that too. And the result was that students started choosing schools primarily based on prestige, connections, and bar passage rates because money was no longer the bottleneck. And as a result, law schools knew they could keep increasing tuition because they knew students could borrow whatever they needed. Think about it from their perspective. If they can just charge more and students can borrow to pay for it with government backed loans, law schools had zero incentive to keep the prices down. But fast forward 20 years to today, law school costs have exploded. We're talking $80,000 to $100,000 per year at some private schools, like, for example, Columbia, when you include living expenses in big cities. And the government has decided that it's done writing blank checks. So here we are, same sky high prices, but suddenly the federal loans are no longer going to be available. And so let's talk about how rare it is to find a school that could stay under this new $50,000 federal loan cap. I went through the latest ABA 509 report data. Those are basically like the official receipts for every accredited law school in the country. And here's what I found. Out of nearly 200 ABA approved law schools, only 13 of them have a resident cost of attendance under $50,000 a year. 13 out of nearly 200. That's roughly 6%, not very high. That means if you're hoping to pay for law school entirely with federal loans, your options just got cut down to only a handful of schools. And here's the other twist. A lot of these schools are places you might not have thought about living. We're talking smaller cities, colder climates, maybe not where you pictured yourself launching your legal career. But if you're serious about avoiding a huge private loan bill, these off-the-radar schools might suddenly look a lot more attractive. And of course, there's the fine print. Most of these schools under the $50,000 threshold are for in-state residents specifically. And so if you're coming in from out of state, the price jumps up, sometimes way over the cap, which means if you're strategic, you might plan to get residency after your first year. Some states make that doable, others not so much. And here's where it gets interesting. This is where the creative applicants are going to win. They're going to look at those under the cap schools and think to themselves, okay, maybe this isn't my dream city, but what if I crush the LSAT, I negotiate a scholarship, and can graduate with minimal debt? That changes my entire career flexibility. Now, the old game in law school admissions was pretty simple. Get the highest score, LSAT score you can, you aim as high in the rankings as you can, and you figure out the money later. And the Grad Plus loans made figuring out the money later fine. But now the game is not just can I get in? It's can I get in and pay for it without wrecking my financial future? So you got to think like an investor. Investors don't just buy a stock because the company has a cool logo or a fancy office. They look at return on investment. How much money do they put in and how much can they get back? So I want you to start looking at law school the same way. Every school on your list is an investment. What's the price? What's the return? And what's the risk if you can't get enough aid? And that does not mean settling for less. In fact, when we work with students on their LSAT prep, the ones who think strategically about ROI often end up in better positions than the ones who just chase prestige, because they choose schools where they're more competitive, they can get bigger scholarships, and they graduate with options. And this change is not hitting everyone the same way. For some people, it's just a mild inconvenience, but for others, it's a full-on knockout punch. If you are a career changer with existing grad school debt, if you already have loans from an MBA, a master's, that $200,000 lifetime limit is for all your graduate education combined. If you've already used up $80,000 out of the 200, you're not walking into law school with a clean slate, and that cap hits you even harder. If you are a KJD student with no cosigner, meaning you're going straight from college to law school and your family is not helping you out, you have only the Grad Plus loans to help you out, that's going to be gone. You still have that cap. If you are on a public interest track, if you want to work in legal aid, nonprofits, or government, that's amazing. But those jobs don't come with six-figure salaries. You're going to want to keep your debt low from the start. And some private law schools in major metro areas have total costs sky high, $80,000 to $100,000 per year, triple the new federal cap. You have to cover more than half your costs with private loans every single year before interest. And so what I'm going to share is especially important for the students in these categories. Basically, you want to get the highest possible LSAT score and get that merit aid to keep your cost of attendance as low as possible. You want to opt for scholarships over prestige, meaning you want to go to a lower ranked school with more scholarship money than a higher ranked school with less scholarship money. Look at those ABA 509 reports for each school that you're considering and look carefully at that total cost of attendance beyond the tuition. Look at the fees, living expenses, books, everything all together. Subtract $50,000 from that total, and that number you're left with is your yearly gap. You don't want to blow up your budget. Consider safety schools with lower numbers, lower medians, where you can get significant scholarship money, possibly even a full ride. You also want to look at in-state tuition options to drop your yearly tuition bill significantly. In some cases, you could drop it by $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year. If you're not going in-state, maybe you can earn residency after your first year. You want to change your mailing address to one that is in-state. You want to register to vote locally, get a state driver's license, and filing your taxes in that state specifically. It's not glamorous, it's pretty bureaucratic, but it's well worth considering those options to keep your obligations as low as possible. You also want to look at negotiating scholarships. Most people never even try it. They're afraid that it's rude, but you can negotiate. Schools expect it, and it's simpler than you might think. First, you want to get your competing offers on paper. You don't want to just call them and say, another school might give me more money. You want to have the actual scholarship offer in your inbox with concrete facts and compare apples to apples. You want to go to school A and you've got an offer from school B. Make sure they're comparable in cost and ranking before you try to use it as leverage. You also want to time your negotiation for maximum impact. The best time to negotiate is right after another school's seat deposit deadline passes, because at that point, some admitted students will drop out and suddenly your target school now has unused scholarship funds they can reallocate to you. You also want to frame your negotiations respectfully. What I mean by that is don't try to play hardball. You're not saying, give me more money or I'm out. You're saying, I would really love to attend, but I have this other offer that makes the financial picture very different. Is there any way you can help close the gap? In other words, you want to give them a chance to say yes without making them lose face. And also, don't burn bridges. Law schools talk to each other. Keep it professional, keep it polite, because even if they can't match the offer, they might surprise you with other forms of aid like housing stipends or grants for your books. We always tell our students at LSAT Unplugged, your LSAT score gets you in the door, but your ability to negotiate based on that LSAT score could be worth tens of thousands of dollars. Negotiation is one of the highest ROI skills you can learn in this process. Now, law schools are aware of the coming changes, and a lot of them are already scrambling behind the scenes. First, they are shifting their scholarship strategies. Many schools have been using merit-based aid to lure in students with high LSAT scores, and that boosts their rankings. But under the new loan caps, you can expect more of that money to shift towards need-based aid, because if students can't cover the gap with federal loans, they just won't enroll, and schools cannot afford to have empty seats. Second, these schools are talking to local banks to explore special private loan programs that might come with slightly better rates or more flexible terms than generic private loans, but they're still private loans and they have all those same risks associated. Schools are also trying to hit up their alumni for donations, and they're launching what they call student emergency aid campaigns to help fund shortfalls for admitted students so they can still attend. And the uncomfortable reality is that many private schools simply won't be able to slash tuition enough to get under the $50,000 cap without gutting their budgets. And for some schools, this is an existential threat. There are deans who quietly believe this change could reduce the number of ABA accredited schools from just under 200 today to closer to only 100 within a decade. And so if you're applying to law school this cycle, next cycle, really anytime in the next few years, you're going to see schools get creative and maybe even a little bit desperate to make the numbers work. Your job is to see which offers are truly in your best interest and which are just a band-aid on a much bigger financial wound. Now, just when you think you've wrapped your head around this $50,000 cap, there is another twist coming. Buried in the same legislation is something called an earnings outcome rule, meaning if a school's JD graduates don't earn enough compared to people with just a bachelor's degree, that school could lose its eligibility for all federal student loans, not just Grad Plus, but unsubsidized Stafford loans too. Now, think about that for a second. This is not about whether you personally land a good job. It's about whether the average graduate from that school is making enough money to justify the cost of the degree in the eyes of the government. If they fail that test, the school could lose access to federal loans entirely. The schools that are most at risk are schools with a heavy focus on public interest law, where graduates often earn far less than big law associates. Also, regional schools in areas with weaker job markets. And finally, any program where a large percentage of graduates don't practice law or work in low-paying, non-legal roles. And the kicker is the feds aren't enforcing this tomorrow. The data collection for this is starting in 2026, but the real enforcement is going to be likely 4 to 5 years from now, which means if you're applying now, you might be graduating just as these rules start to hit, and your law school, your alma mater at that point, will be struggling to survive. Now, of course, this does not mean that you should avoid public interest law or only chase the highest salaries, but it does mean that you should be brutally honest about the financial outcomes of the schools on your list, not just the rankings or the glossy brochures. So let's pull this all together so that you know exactly what to do and when. First, before you even apply to law school, I want you to run your gap numbers. I want you to look at the ABA 509 reports for every single school on your list. Look at the total cost of attendance minus $50,000, because that's the amount that you'll have to cover with scholarships, private loans, or savings every single year. And if that gap scares you now, imagine it with interest on top of that. Secondly, research in-state residency rules, because you want to figure out if your target schools allow in-state tuition after year one, or if they have any reciprocity agreements that you can leverage. Because if a moving now could save you $15,000 a year, it's worth considering. Next, I want you to get your credit in shape, because private lenders will care way more about your credit score than the federal government ever did. You want to look at your credit reports, any dispute errors, you want to pay down your balances and set every single bill to auto pay. You also want to build your financial safety list. Think about at least 2 schools you could attend without taking on massive private loans, ideally ones where your numbers, your LSAT, your GPA, put you in the top quartile so that you're in line for strong scholarships. And then after you get your offers coming in, you want to negotiate scholarships hard. You want to use written offers from other schools as leverage and time your asks after their seat deposit deadlines pass, when money might be freeing up. And you also want to evaluate any offers that you get like an investor. Look at total cost, likely salary outcomes, and long-term flexibility. So there you have it on the federal loan situation coming up in 2026, starting in July. So this is for anybody starting law school next fall and beyond. Now I'm going to take some questions from the chat, anything at all, LSAT and law school admissions. Happy to entertain any questions that come in. So we have a question here, a little bit off topic, but that's okay, about reading comp in particular. You're stuck at -6, -7. How do you get to -0? What should you do differently when you're reading and answering the questions? So the fix here is not to read faster. The fix is to read for structure, then to answer with proof. First, you have your pre-pass setup. You set your intention before you read a single word. Your goal is to capture the structure of the passage, not the detail. Your job is to know who's speaking, what's their view, and how does each paragraph move the argument forward. Second, you want to read with a pencil, not a highlighter, because your job here is not to transcribe, it's to label After each paragraph, you want to write a one-line job in the margin. For example, paragraph 1 is the author's opinion. Paragraph 2 contains evidence or a counter view. Paragraph 3 contains a rebuttal, a resolution, or implications. Think that you're looking for the paragraph's purpose, not a paragraph summary. If your note is longer than one line, it's far too much. Then you want to track the 3 big signals. First, what is the author's attitude? Is it supportive? Is it critical? Is it neutral? You want to circle attitude words like unfortunately, promising, or controversial. Then you have your viewpoints, meaning who believes what. And third, you have your shifts, like contrast and causal words like however, but, therefore, and because. Those are your turns or your pivots, and most questions test those points of change in direction. Then you build your skeleton. After the final paragraph, you want to force a one-line main point. Author argues that X because Y. Then you write down a one-line structure map, like intro, then counter, reply, and finally result. Then you answer the questions in 2 passes. Passage A, you have your low-hanging fruit first, like main point, primary purpose, author's attitude, and any question with inline references that you can verify quickly. Then you have your harder inferences where you go back for the detail-oriented questions. Because you already have the skeleton now, you're not going to get stuck. And remember that every single answer must be provable with support from the text or the structure of the passage. If you cannot point to a specific line or a structural reason, it's garbage, you toss it out. Good reading comp is basically closed book, open book, meaning your book is the marginal notes that you just made on your scratch paper. Now, there are 4 classic reading comp traps that you want to beat. First is out of scope. If it sounds smart, but it's not actually in the passage, goodbye, it's gone. Second, you have your extreme language, things like always, never, and all, because the author is almost never going to be writing like that. They're a lot more nuanced, a lot more moderate. Then you have the wrong viewpoint, where the answer is true for viewpoint 2, when the question was asking about viewpoint 1 or vice versa. Then you have distortions, meaning swaps of details, where it's the right topic, but the wrong relationship, like causation versus correlation or example versus conclusion. Now let's talk timing. Your target should be roughly 9 minutes per passage, including the questions. After the first 3 minutes, you want to be done reading the passage plus taking any notes on your scratch paper. Then for the next 5 or 6 minutes, you go through the questions, first the global ones, then the local ones. And if a question's getting kind of sticky at 90 seconds, you flag it, skip it, move on, come back later. Every question is worth the same, so you never want to get bogged down on any particular question. Now, here's your daily 15-minute reading comp drill. You spend 6 minutes reading one old passage and writing one-line tasks per paragraph. Then you spend 4 minutes answering only the main point, primary purpose, and author's attitude questions. Then finally, the last 5 minutes, you check the answers and write down one rule you learned. For example, the author rarely uses extreme claims. Or paragraph 2, introduce a counterpoint, watch for a rebuttal in paragraph 3. That's it. Finally, review like a lawyer. For every single question that you miss or guess on, you want to ask yourself, which paragraph job would have prevented this miss? Which word tricked me? Like some, likely, appears, critics argue. And finally, what's my new rule to catch it next time? You want to write down one sentence, then move on. Now, getting -0, meaning perfection, is not about reading every single word perfectly. It's knowing the map so well that every question has a home. You see a choice and you think to yourself, that belongs in paragraph 2, counterpoint, or that tone is too strong for this author. It should feel boring, and that's good. Bottom line, you want to stop reading for facts and start reading for structure. You want to label each paragraph's job, capture the author's attitude and the viewpoints, then you answer with proof or you toss it out. If you do that 15-minute reading comp drill daily for 2 weeks, you're going to watch your -7 drop down to -3, then -1, then -0. Great question. Keep them coming. Happy to answer as many as I can. So we've got one here. I went up 6 points on a practice test, but I'm still not at my target. Should I be happy about this, or does it not matter until I hit my goal score? So yes, it matters a lot. Congrats on going up 6 points. Of course, it's an outlier, not a guarantee you'll experience that on test day, but it's a trend in the right direction. But I do think it's worth celebrating small wins. Now, most students ignore progress because it's not the final score. They'll get a 6-point jump and they'll say, it's still not a 170. But the LSAT rewards consistency. If you can show up again and again with the same solid habits, you're well on your way to getting to that 170. So first, we want to define what counts as a win. A win is any repeatable behavior or outcome that moves you closer to your target. For example, finishing logical reasoning with your pacing checkpoints on time, getting necessary assumption accuracy above 80% for an entire week, moving your reading comp from -7 to -4, completing 2 full practice tests in a single week without skipping review. These are not accidents. They are signals that your system is working. Now, right after your study session, I want you to write down 3 bullets in a tracking document. First, what improved today? Second, what caused it? And third, what will I repeat next time around? Keep it down just to 1 minute. The goal here is that you're training your brain to notice progress and do it again. Then we turn wins into rules. So don't just say, I did better in logical reasoning. Write down 1 rule that you can reuse. For example, flag at 90 seconds and move on, return later. Or write paragraph jobs in reading comp before touching the questions. Or negate the core claim in necessary assumption, but don't over-negate. Those rules become your personal playbook because you'll use them on test day without thinking. It'll be automatic. Then you celebrate without breaking your rhythm. No giant rewards, no week off, just keep it simple. Say to yourself out loud, I moved from -6 to -4, and that's real progress. Add a check mark next to a visible calendar. Then take a 5-minute victory break, grab a glass of water, go for a walk, then get back to life. You're reinforcing the behavior without losing momentum. And yeah, celebrate the win with a friend, for example. Text your friend, post in your study group, and this creates accountability because you anchor the win to a concrete next step. Now, the problem is that after a win, people get sloppy. They'll change 5 different things at once. I don't want you to do that. Just ask yourself 1 single question. What will I do the same tomorrow to keep this going? Then at the end of the week, write down your best practice test score, your lowest practice test score, and 1 habit that made the average rise. You're measuring your baseline, and your baseline is what you carry with you into test day. And you will have rough days, and that's okay. You want to note that today's score is just data, nothing more. It is not who you are. And you want to think to yourself, what changed? What led to the drop? Was it sleep? Was it timing? Was it section order? Was I distracted? Then note 1 fix you will test next time around. And I want you to celebrate the idea that you're following a process and it will scale over time. 1 lucky outlier doesn't really matter, but finishing logical reasoning with time to spare does matter. Reading comp with clean paragraph maps matters. I want you to celebrate the habits that you can repeat again tomorrow. Before you end a study block, say to yourself, my win of the day is I kept my logical reasoning pacing. My lesson of the day is I was watching for extreme language in the answer choices. My plan for tomorrow is necessary assumption drills and 1 reading comp passage. 30 seconds, done, closure. Small wins are the bricks that build up to your final score. So track them. Name the rule that created them. Repeat the rule and your baseline will rise. Your confidence will rise. And that is exactly how you walk into test day and deliver the score that you've been practicing for. Now, folks, I want to ask a question. Feel free to drop your comments in the chat. I'm thinking about doing some daily live LSAT classes here on YouTube and Instagram. I'll cover different LSAT topics, both logical reasoning and reading comprehension, different sections, different question types, changing up the format a little. I'm always looking to experiment and try out new things. And so if you're interested in me running daily LSAT classes here on YouTube, do me a favor. Just drop a question or a comment here in the chat. Let me know if you'd be in favor of that. And if so, any requests for topics you'd like me to cover, I can take those into consideration and make some sort of outline or syllabus for what I'll be covering in the coming days and weeks. But I want your feedback, your ideas, your requests. Drop a comment on the video, leave a comment in the stream on Instagram, and I'll get to as many of your topics as I can in the coming days and weeks, whatever you want me to cover, LSAT and law school admissions. The floor is yours. I'm happy to help out however I can. Got a request to cover test anxiety, test day prep, getting ready for test day. What can I do to stay in control? I try to calm down. It doesn't work. So the thing is that you don't beat test anxiety by trying to feel calm. You beat it by training control. You want small, repeatable habits your brain can run even when you feel nervous. So first, you want to set up a daily focus routine. You do 4-7-8 breathing for 5 cycles, meaning you inhale for 4, you hold for 7, and you exhale for 8, over and over and over. Then you label what you're experiencing and you return back to the task at hand. For example, my heart is racing. That's normal. I'm going to go back to the breath. Then you count your breaths from 1 to 10. If you lose track, you start over. That restart is the rep. You're not seeking perfection. You're just teaching your brain to listen to you. So before each section, run this routine, 2 breaths, the 4-7-8 routine twice. You glance at your pacing routine, for example, first 10 questions in logical reasoning in roughly 10 minutes. You're doing each reading comp passage in roughly 9 minutes, including the questions. And you have your 60-second reset protocol. If you're feeling yourself spiraling, put your pencil down, your shoulders down for 5 seconds. You do some box breathing, cycles of 4 for 20 seconds, and you name what you're experiencing. For example, I'm stuck on question 12, and that's normal. Then you decide, you flag it, you move on. Then you notice your heart rate increasing. If you're experiencing stress during your timed exams, as an exercise, might sound silly, but super effective, you do 20 jumping jacks before you start your practice test to deliberately provoke the biological response that you will experience on test day as a result of your stress. So in other words, if your heart is beating, if your palms are sweaty before you start an exam, you deliberately engineer stress and sweat and heart racing by doing an exercise to provoke a similar physiological response. In other words, you deliberately provoke an elevated heart rate to test your ability to still think clearly under those conditions. You also want to control the boring stuff during your study weeks, especially in the final weeks before the exam. So for example, sleep, diet, exercise, relaxation. For sleep, you want to wake up at the same exact time for 7 days before the exam. You want to match your caffeine intake and timing to test day itself. You're not experimenting the day of the exam with a double espresso shot 2 seconds before it starts. You also want to mimic your snacks, your breakfast day of. For example, light carbs and a little bit of water before the exam. You also want your tech work down, for example, your logins, your scratch paper setup, and exactly what your pacing is going to be. Now, I also want to think about after the exam. So after you take your practice test, you want to open up a document and write down 4 lines. What is the trigger I noticed? What stressed me out? What tool did I use? Was it a breathing exercise? Was it focusing on my mindset and noticing when my mind was wandering or I was spiraling? Did it work? Why or why not? And what am I going to change for next time around? Then you set up a sample study week. For example, every single day, 3 to 5 minutes, focusing on the breath. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, timed reading comp or logical reasoning with 1 deliberate reset when I feel stressed. Saturdays, full timed exam with a launch sequence before every section. So am I going to do jumping jacks, for example, before I start the exam? Then after the fact, you do your after action review. You're recapping what the practice test was like, what stress did you experience, and you make an update for 1 rule, what you'll change next time around. And of course, I'm not saying this will eliminate anxiety. You will still feel nerves, but you will still keep moving forward anyway. You will flag questions, you will skip, you will move on. You'll focus on your breath. Your timing will maintain, your score will maintain, and that is control. Run this for 2 weeks and you will notice that your anxiety stops running you. So again, folks, I'm thinking about doing daily live LSAT classes here on YouTube and Instagram. Every single day, I'll cover a different section, a different question type, a different method of reasoning. If you're interested in that, tell me what you think. Let me know any requests for topics you'd like me to cover, and I'll add them to the agenda. I'm thinking I'll be doing these every weekday when I can, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern time, about the same time I started this live stream today. So 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, covering a different section, different question type, free LSAT classes here on YouTube and Instagram. So tune in 2 p.m. Eastern time, starting tomorrow. I'll run those pretty much every single day, unless there's a holiday or something, in which case I might not be able to join, but I'll let you know in advance. Thanks, folks, for joining. In the meantime, I wish you all the best, and I'll see you tomorrow.